Welcome, everybody. We'll get started here in just a minute. We're just waiting for everybody to get logged in, get us started. We'll get started at the top of the hour, but we're really glad you guys are all joining us today. And for those just coming into the room, I was just saying we'll get started here in just a few minutes. We've got another minute to go. My name is Missy Gilliland. I'm the Learning and Development Manager here at SimiTree. While we're doing this webinar today, if you have any questions or need anything, please feel free to use the chat. If you have questions for Christy directly, as she's going through the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A. If we don't get to all the questions today, we'll be sure to follow up, but we should have plenty of time at the end of this presentation to answer any of the questions that you have. So feel free to put them into the Q&A. If you need anything as we're going through, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll address any issues that come up. The handout will be attached to the chat. If for some reason you can't access that, I'll put my contact information in there and you can reach out and I can send you the handout. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to SimiTree's webinar on data-driven business development with the market analysis platform. I'm going to turn everything over to Christy Lang to get us started today. But again, if you need anything, feel free to reach out through the chat, or if you have questions, use the Q&A. Christy, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Missy. Just double checking you can hear me and you can still see my screen. All right, great. First of all, I just want to echo Missy's welcome. We're glad that you've chosen to spend a few minutes with us today. We're going to try and keep this tight and productive. Before I jump into the specific content for today's conversation, just a quick introduction to any of you who are unfamiliar with SimiTree. I'm going to give you the super short version of who we are. We are an organization that offers outsource OASIS review, coding, billing services, data analysis, as well as professional services, consulting to help you with whatever challenge your organization is going through, with a really deep history in home health and hospice, and working with clients in other post-acute care settings as well. So if you'd like to know more about us, I invite you to visit our website at SimiTree.com or give us an outreach and let us know what questions you have. All right, so let's jump into the specific conversation we have outlined for today. I really have two categories of content that I want to discuss here. They fall into a couple of simple buckets. The majority of the conversation is going to be focused on the value of using data to drive your business development efforts, whether that's developing an understanding of where you want to focus, prioritizing the things that you want to do, figuring out where you can find new referrals, or how you really target your referral management and liaison efforts. Whether you have access to market data today, or whether you've thought about getting access to market data and you're kind of trying to figure out if it's worthwhile for your organization, we're going to talk about the value in that part of the business development work. And hopefully you'll walk away with some fresh ideas about how you can use market intelligence to be smarter about how you approach referral management and business development efforts. And then I also want to spend a few minutes introducing you to the market analysis platform, which is a relatively new analytics offering from SimiTree. It's an online access to data that will help answer some of the questions we'll talk about being valuable in this process, and make it really easy to get to that information. So let's jump into it. And just one more echoing of what Missy said to begin with. I love questions. I love feedback. Feel free to enter anything into the Q&A or into the chat. We'll address things kind of as we go or at the end, just depending on the flow and what we're seeing coming in. And if there's anything specific to your organization that you'd like to kind of bounce ideas off of, we're really just going to scratch the surface today. So we'd love to have a deeper follow-up conversation that's really specific to your agency's needs. So the first thing I invite you to kind of think about as we approach this topic is, what are your business goals? There is no one right answer. There's not one answer that applies to every organization across the country. There can be really diverse factors that influence the way that you think about your business goals. And being thoughtful about answering the question, what are your business goals, can really set the foundation for effectively developing a strategy towards meeting those goals. But I'm going to advocate today that regardless of the fact that there's no one right answer, and your answer may even have multiple parts, here are some things that you may be thinking about in terms of your business goals as an organization. Do you want to develop growth in your referrals in your current market? So do you want to expand your market share in your current market? Do you maybe want to refine the types of referrals that you're receiving? So rather than grow referrals overall, maybe grow in a certain category of patient condition or a certain specialty service that you offer as an organization. Do you want to expand into a new community? Maybe it's contiguous to what you're doing today, or maybe it's an entirely new space that you're unfamiliar with. Do you want to maybe just really maintain the status quo, but make sure you don't have any backsliding in that? You're happy with where you are today, but you want to make sure that you're solid in that position, maybe give yourself a little bit of buffer, or potentially position with existing referral sources in a stronger way. Well, what I'm going to advocate for today, that regardless of what your goals are, regardless of if you have multiple parts to your goals, data can be a really useful and valuable part of making sure that your approach is smart, given where you are and what you want to accomplish, and then help you figure out how to actually accomplish those goals. So let's give a couple of examples here. Let's say that your plan is, or your goals are to get referral growth in your current market. It may be helpful to understand which hospitals are referring the most to post-acute care today. Where are those referrals going? What are the hospitals' needs, so that you can make sure you're addressing those as you approach conversations with those hospitals. If your goal is to expand into a new community, we're kind of simplifying here, but in this category, if your goal is to expand into a new community, how much do you know about that community today? What does that market look like? Who's operating in that space? Is there a concentrated market share, or is it really distributed across a number of agencies? Those answers may help you decide your approach to that market and your strategy to that market. Who are the other players? What partnerships appear to exist? Where might be a more attractive potential source of referrals for you to pursue versus others in the community? If your goal is to strengthen or solidify your current position, well, then let's play a little bit of defense. Let's figure out what other agencies your primary referral sources are working with today, and make sure that you have a strong message and strong relationship with those primary referral sources, particularly focused on not letting anyone kind of creep into your market share today. And part of that is understanding, how do you stand apart from that competition? First, in answering the question about how do you stand apart from the competition, is knowing who that competition is. Second is really diving into the metrics that can help demonstrate your difference relative to other options in your community. So let's talk about some examples within each of these categories. I'm going to start with referral growth in the current market. This is the one that we probably hear the most consistently from organizations across the country, kind of regardless of size, regardless of the market that they're operating in. We hear an awful lot of agencies wanting to strengthen their position in their current market. So some of those questions that will be helpful to achieve that goal: what hospitals are referring the most to post-acute care today? What physicians are? Where are those referrals going? What do the current existing partnerships look like? And then again, what are the referral sources' needs? Because if you can address what matters most to them, you have a greater chance of standing apart from your competition. So here's an example of what that might look like. We might start with just understanding who are the hospitals operating in a space today, and what is the volume of Medicare discharges that they're working with. You probably know the list of hospitals in your space today, but you may not have a quantifiable understanding of the volume of patients that they're discharging within that Medicare patient population. But more importantly, you may not understand kind of what is their use of post-acute care today. If you understand their use of post-acute care today, you can approach the conversation appropriately. And let me give you a couple of different examples here. If you know that you have hospitals that are discharging a really high volume of patients home with no post-acute care at all, or maybe hospitals that are discharging a high volume of patients to skilled nursing facilities, that's one conversation. You may need to be advocating for the use of home health and hospice services. talking about the appropriateness, about the value to the patients, about the value to the hospital's readmission rates, or to the transitions of care experience from the patient and the family's perspective. So we may be approaching that conversation with that advocacy in mind and making sure that the patients are getting the most appropriate care possible. Potentially that means shifting some patients out of the discharge with no post-acute care or discharge to skilled nursing facility categories and shifting some of them being referred to home health or hospice as appropriate. On the other hand, if you have hospitals that are already referring a high volume of patients to home health or hospice, that's a different conversation. You don't necessarily want to approach them with this perspective of advocating for the benefit of home health and hospice because they already understand it. And you may risk souring that conversation a little bit if you approach them like they don't understand the value of these post-acute care settings of care. But what they may need help in understanding is why your home health or hospice is a preferable alternative to who they're working with today. So who are they working with today? That again is going to help you craft the strategy and the message appropriately. And this is one of the areas of analysis that I find really interesting because we see a diversity of patterns across different markets across the country. What you're looking at here, I know I've got the names grayed out because we're looking at real data. So we've kind of masked the identities of the hospitals, which are listed across the top columns, and the home health agencies. And we also look at this by hospice, receiving referrals from those hospitals. So each of those percentages shows that kind of cross section, the volume of patients discharged to home health or to hospice from that hospital, and then admitted by a specific home health or hospice agency. So here you can see a couple of different patterns. One, we have the top two hospitals, top two being defined by the highest volume of referrals to home health or hospice. Those two in the first two columns, they don't have more than half of their patients going to a single home health or hospice agency. So you can see the hospital with the highest volume of home health referrals in this particular example, their tightest partnership is only receiving 45% of those referrals. On the flip side, those hospitals in the third and fourth position both have a tighter referral relationship where we have 86 and 78% of their home health referrals being admitted by one specific agency. So if you're in this sort of a market, you may approach the conversation with each of these hospitals differently. In those examples with the green circles, they have that apparent really tight referral relationship. They may even be part of the same health system. It may be unlikely that you're going to be able to displace many of the referrals that home health agency or hospice is receiving today, but you may position yourself as an alternative for certain conditions. If you have a great area of care that's a specialty service, perhaps the hospital should be thinking about sending patients with certain conditions to your agency rather than to that one that is their primary partner. Or, their primary partner isn't going to be able to service all of their patients. They may be at capacity sometimes. They may have needs that they can't service. The patients may be in an area where that home health agency or hospice doesn't serve. And other reasons may cause a patient to not be admitted by that one agency. So how can you position yourself as kind of the first secondary choice, the first alternative choice in those situations? But those conversations with the first two hospitals, they clearly don't have as tight of a relationship with any agency. So there's a different conversation in terms of positioning yourself with those agencies. And it may be putting yourself right up against those leaders and talking about the value that you bring to that relationship over what they're experiencing with those other agencies today. Maybe you can start to chip away at some of that market share. The other side of this is understanding the hospital's needs, because the more you understand the hospital's needs and current practices, the more you can be specific about how you approach that conversation and address the things that they are facing on a daily basis. Some of that need may be just looking at how they've utilized post-acute care, Over the last couple of years, we've seen, as you might imagine, a lot of changes in 2020. As a general rule, fewer patients were discharged to skilled nursing facilities and more patients to home health in 2020. In some markets, that's starting to shift back. Skilled nursing facility referrals are starting to go back up, while home health referrals are starting to go back down. In other markets, it's staying really steady, and in some, we're even seeing a continuation of that trend. It's almost like they were awakened to the value of referring to home health and hospice when they were forced into that by the COVID pandemic to a certain degree, and they're taking advantage of that new observation and increasing their referrals. So just understanding what they've done in the past, how that's continuing today, can be a valuable component of that conversation, as can be understanding their discharge referral patterns compared to national, yes, but also compared to other hospitals in the area. If they're maybe utilizing services in a different way, that could be the start of a conversation about, I know that you are already well aware and ahead of your peers in terms of using home health and hospice. In this example, we see this hospital having a higher than national and higher than market rate of referring to home health. I know you already understand the value of home health. Let's talk about how we can take that to the next level. Versus maybe if you're a hospice and you're seeing that they're underutilizing hospice, that may be a different conversation about what are the needs of your patients, and are there some that could really benefit from end-of-life care rather than trying to force them into another setting of care. The other side of kind of understanding the hospital's needs is understanding things like their quality scores. If you haven't started talking 30-day readmission rates of your hospitals yet, just so you know, 30-day readmission rates can impact the hospital's reimbursement rate. If they have a higher than expected 30-day readmission rate for certain conditions, they may be at risk at losing some of their Medicare reimbursement. So a lot of hospitals are really paying attention to this. Understanding their 30-day readmission rates, and again, how it compares to a couple of really relevant norms. In this example, we're looking at state and national averages. Understanding if readmission rates are solid in one category of patients, but maybe problematic in another category. Like you see here, this hospital has lower than state and national norm readmission rates for your hip and knee patient population, but higher readmission rates for your heart failure patient population. Perhaps part of that conversation that you approach that hospital with is talking about how you manage your cardiac patients in that post-acute care setting, and perhaps showing the 30-day readmission rates of your cardiac patient population, and talking about how your success in this particular quality metric can help lead to success for the hospital. Another part of understanding your referral sources may be just understanding where their patients are. What you see here is maps from a hospital showing where patients discharged to home health and patients discharged to hospice are actually receiving care. So this can be part of that conversation as well, making sure that your areas of service align well with where their patients need to receive their care. And perhaps if there's a mismatch between one of their primary referral receivers, so one of the partners that is admitting a lot of their home health and hospice referrals, maybe if they don't have a service territory that matches really well with the hospital's patients' areas of residence, and you can cover some of that overlap, that can be part of the conversation as well. And then finally, we start to get into that more specific view. This is another way of looking at the data that we saw in that cross grid a few slides ago, where we were looking at hospitals to home health agencies and hospices. You can see specific for an individual hospital, what the share of referrals going to individual home health and hospice agencies is, and how that translates to actual patient volume. So you can start to think about planning for any potential change in volume for your agency as a result of working with a new referral source. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the goal of wanting to expand into a new community. Again, it could be a neighboring community, or it could be a completely different part of your state, or maybe even a neighboring state, or heck, maybe if you're a larger organization, you're even looking out a state or two. If you're expanding into a new community, it's helpful to understand what that community looks like. And if you haven't operated there before and you don't have someone who's maybe boots on the ground in that physical location already, you don't have that intuitive sense of who the players are, what the partnerships might look like, that sort of a thing. And data can help inform those, that understanding of that new market. What does the market look like? Who are the home health and hospice agencies operating in it today? Do they share market share pretty evenly, or do we have a couple of big gorillas who dominate the market? Again, all of this information and intelligence helps you craft your approach to a new market, or maybe just assess if that market really makes sense for you or not. It may seem like a good idea, but once you dig into the data, it may actually not align with your agency's areas of strength or the level of investment that might be required to be successful in that market. And that can help you make smarter decisions about your expansion efforts. So let's look at some examples. And I would argue that a lot of these examples, while I kind of categorize them in the area of one goal, really are relevant across the goals. And this is a primary one. Let's just think about, what does the market look like? If we're considering going into home health or into hospice in a new community, who are the home health providers? Who are the hospice providers? Just who's there? You may have some folks that you've competed with in the past and you know you can be successful against, or maybe you know that it's a really big challenge trying to go head to head with them, or you may have a whole bunch of providers that you're unfamiliar with and you want to do more research and due diligence to better understand what you're up against if you do decide to compete with them. This sort of information that you're looking at here is a list of the home health or, again, hospice agencies that are operating in a market. And we're looking at them sorted based on their market share in the most current time frame. So what we're looking at here with market share is, first of all, just understanding who are the bigger agencies in the space, not only who's operating in the space, but who are the bigger agencies, who are the smaller agencies, but also what does bigger and smaller mean here? And again, this is one of those characteristics that's super interesting because we see such a variety of numbers in that 1 to 10 position in different markets across the country. In this particular example, the largest agency is only capturing 5% market share. That's not a dominant position, if you will. So this tells me that this is a really fragmented market where we have a lot of agencies who are each capturing a relatively small part of the market. Now that market may be a really big market, so 5% may represent a really big dollar amount, but it's still only 5% of what's available. The other thing that this view tells us is how their market share has trended over time and how that translates to position over time. So you can see here for our top provider, they've gained a little bit of market share in 2021. While they were pretty consistent in their market share for the other 3 years, it looks like they're starting to creep up in 2021. And you can also see, like, the second largest provider in 2021 was the 6th largest just a few years ago. In 2018, they only captured 1% market share, putting them in 6th position. And now they're up to the 2nd position with 3% market share. That tells you a little bit of what's going on with that particular agency. They're clearly making some progress, making some effort to increase their position in this market and having some success. And you can see kind of the flip story of the agency below that. Even though they haven't changed market share really in these rounded numbers, they have lost a little bit in terms of their position because we've had other agencies gaining ground on them. And there are those examples highlighted. All right, here's another example, just because I told you that we see a wide variety of these numbers across different markets. This is just another example. Again, this is all real data. I just fuzzied the names for not calling anyone out, just in case any of you who are on this report are on this call. I didn't want there to be that awkwardness. But here is a completely different story in terms of market share. The last market, the largest agency only captured 5% market share. In this market, it is a completely different perspective. We have a concentration. The largest agency captures more than 1/3 of the home health or hospice business in this particular space. And those top 3 combined, where in the previous example, the top 3 combined were at roughly, 10, 11% market share, something like that. Here we're looking at 60 some odd % among those top 3. So we've got 3 kind of big gorillas and then smaller agencies below that. Each of these different stories, each of these different data sets can tell you a little bit of a different story. It appears that we have more brand loyalty in this market. You're approaching this market where we've got that really strong presence. You may not be seeking to kind of compete at that level, but look for more of a disruptive presence in the market. In the previous example, we don't appear to have that same brand loyalty or strength of a brand or strength of a position. So it's a different conversation and a different approach. So our third goal, strengthen or solidify your current position. If you're pretty happy with where you are now and you maybe just want to make sure you can stay there, you're in a good place, this may be your primary goal, or maybe this is your goal for the next year and then you want to look at growing. Again, there's no one right answer, and definitely get a diversity of answers across the entire country. But if your goal is to strengthen or solidify your current position, and you are looking to play more of that defensive position, you may just want to really understand what you're up against and make sure you're putting your defenses in the right place. So what other agencies are your primary referral sources working with? Are there any areas of risk there? Where do you need to really firm up relationships and make sure that you establish yourself as the alternative of choice in these conversations? And positioning yourself as the alternative of choice requires understanding who your competition is and what it is about your agency that makes you a better option. If you're out there advocating your quality scores, but you find out that your main competition with a particular referral source has similar quality scores, well, that's not going to help you stand apart as much. If you find out that their quality scores are actually better, well, that could be actually a little bit of a problematic conversation. So making sure that you understand what you're up against and you're able to articulate the value that you bring to a relationship in order to improve your position in kind of the mental space and in the actual conversations with patients and in that referral process. And then there's also a little something of like, what else can you learn from your competition? Maybe you're looking to solidify your position, and part of that is identifying your main competition with your primary referral sources. And then maybe part of that is, once you identify your strength over those competitors, who are their other referral sources, and are those conversations that you should be pursuing as well. This is an example of how we kind of think about who other providers are. One is just understanding who they are, how long they've been in operation, what their quality scores look like, and what their area of service looks like. The maps below show you not only what counties they serve, but also how much of their revenue comes from each of those counties on the left. And then on the right, it shows how that revenue translates to market share on a county by county basis. Depending on how you see your market and how your competitors see their market, there may be areas of overlap, or you may have a little bit of overlap, or you may have a lot of overlap. And understanding kind of the details of that overlap can be useful in helping you craft how you stand apart from that competition, or maybe what you learn from them. And again, I talked just a moment ago about how I kind of categorize these different types of data based on the goal in question. But this is a really useful view if you're looking at expanding into a new market and you're trying to understand your competition. Like, let's see who they are, how long they've been in operation, what are their star ratings, what is their service territory, and maybe even what has their business look like over time, what does their trended Medicare revenue look like over time, where are they getting their referrals, whether you're seeking to kind of play that defensive posture against your current competitors, or you're looking to understand potential competitors in a new space. How many of their referrals are they getting from hospitals versus community versus SNFs? Can we kind of figure out a strategy, or maybe not an intentional strategy, maybe an unintentional strategy, but regardless, a strategy nonetheless, of how they're pursuing relationships with referral partners? And then specifically, which hospitals and which physicians are they working with? where is the bulk of their referrals coming from, whether we're thinking about those hospital referrals or those community referrals. And how do we use this knowledge in fortifying our position in the market? So now is when I talk a little bit about the market analysis platform, and just a little bit of a spoiler alert. Everything that you just saw is from our market analysis platform. And I want to tell you just a little bit about how we came to bring the market analysis platform, or MAP, to the home health and hospice space. Now, this is a partnership that the analytics team, which I run, and our growth solutions team, which is part of our professional services organization, they work with organizations in developing a growth strategy and training liaisons and working with leaders in the business development domain to make sure that they have a plan for growth or for whatever their market goals are, and that they execute well on that plan. We've been collaborating on looking at market data from various sources for quite a while. We have access to the CMS claims ourselves, and what we found was that regardless of the project scope, regardless of the needs of the client, we are always coming back to a handful of key reports and presenting that information in a way that was really accessible to our clients. Because we found that market data can be really convoluted and hard to access and hard to interpret. So once we saw that we were doing this consistently and we found a lot of value in making this information really accessible, we decided that it might make sense to develop something that our clients could access themselves. So that's how we came to be offering MAP to the industry. The market analysis platform is access to business intelligence, the examples you've seen over the last several slides. But just so you know, it's really designed to be easy to access and easy to actually use. And by busy people, not necessarily data analysts who are behind their computer 6 hours a day and love to play with Excel and Access and BI platforms, but busy people who have other things to do and who really need access to the intelligence within the data versus like the download that gives you every cell of possible imaginable information. We focus on business critical information, that data that's really helpful in driving strategic decisions and prioritization so that you can spend your time actually executing on those priorities. Like I said, no data scientist required. It doesn't require hours to analyze. I mean, I just had a request from one of our consultants yesterday. It's like, I'm doing this presentation for a client. Is there anything you can give me? And within like 15 minutes, I had a collection of reports. And he's like, this is exactly what I was looking for. And it was presentation ready, and it was in a format that made sense to a variety of different audiences. So for the CEO in the presentation, for the business development leader in the presentation, for the board members in the presentation. And that speaks to that final bullet here. It's formatted to make it really easy to understand what we're looking at, highlight key business metrics, highlight key observations, but also with some flexibility. So if that first view doesn't meet all your needs, you have the option to really drill in and customize the analysis to meet your agency or your project's specific needs. And it's not just access to the data tool or the application of the system, because we know that not everybody has familiarity with this data, and data can be really overwhelming. So part of our approach to working with our market analysis platform clients is to provide guidance that helps you not just learn how to click the right buttons in the system to get what you want, but understand what you're looking at and understand how to think about what's going on in your particular market and how that may apply to your organization. So we've got some of that one-on-one coaching as part of the market analysis platform as well. That's why it's a platform and not just a tool or an online application. And like I said before, everything that you just saw is part of the market analysis platform. So it's real data. And as we kind of move beyond the data side of things, when we think about helping clients with their business development goals, again, regardless of the specifics of those goals, we see kind of three main categories driving towards success. The secret sauce is what your agency does really well. It's who you are, it's who your people are, it's the relationships that you have in the community. It's the thing that can be really different from agency to agency, very specific to your organization. We also see best practices as a really key part of this, how you actually go about executing a plan, how you develop the plan, how you execute it, how you work with your liaisons and make sure that they have the skills and knowledge necessary to be successful in their jobs. But then also that data to drive decisions to really make the best practices effective and to help inform that secret sauce and kind of that marriage between the secret sauce and the realities of what's going on from a data-driven perspective. So these all overlap to kind of form a perfect picture. The market analysis platform is there to really inform the data, to bring you the data that helps you drive decisions. SimiTree as an organization can also help you with training on best practices. We have educational resources that are available online, or we have customized training options. And we also, of course, work with a lot of clients to help them figure out their secret sauce, to work with them and their staff and their team to figure out what sets them apart and how they want to leverage their strengths or maybe build new strengths to be successful in the future. So MAP figures into that data to drive decisions, and then all of it together. If you need help in any of those other areas, we'd love to talk to you about how we can help in those conversations as well. So if I were to summarize the market analysis platform, it's data to help you prioritize and focus your limited resources. If you've got resources coming out your ears, like, I don't know, maybe you don't need data to help you figure out what to do with it, but I can't remember the last time I talked with somebody who said, my problem is I just have too much staff. Like, that's not a conversation we have very often. It's more about, we've got to work with what we've got. We have a hard time finding new people, or we can't afford additional people. And we've got to really maximize how effective our team is. So MAP, the market analysis platform, provides that data to help you prioritize and focus those resources, pursue the right referral sources, understand who they are and why they're right, but then also understand the competition for optimal positioning, as well as the referral sources and what they need, and ultimately objectively evaluate your options in order to develop your strategy and in order to make sure whatever direction you invest is going to have the highest likelihood of helping you towards your goals. So if you're interested in learning more, like I've said several times, we love individual conversations. This is a great platform for sharing some ideas and connecting with a big group, but you all are different, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about what you are facing. Maybe some of this resonated with you, maybe there was a little bit of overlap, or maybe you're like, but you didn't even get to my main thing. We'd love to talk to you about your main thing. We tried to touch on what we hear as main things across the industry pretty broadly, but we'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you about your specific challenges if you're so interested. If you're interested in learning more about the market analysis platform, we've got a site specific to that, SimiTreeMap.com. Would love if you drop us a note in the chat, in the QA, or by email, or give us a call. We've got my email address there, so if you want to reach out to me directly, I'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to set up a follow-up conversation to talk about your agency, or to give you a live and customized demonstration of the actual platform in action.
Excellent information, Christy. We did have a question that came in, and I was hoping maybe you could answer this in a broad perspective. They were asking that most hospitals in their area contract with a specific home health. How would you recommend approaching them? How can you kind of target that? I know you touched a little bit about being the alternative. So
yeah, that's the main thing that we find is successful for our clients, is that if you do have those relationships where a high volume of home health or hospice referrals are going to just one agency, it can be tough to break in. But again, that one agency can rarely take care of all patient needs, whether it's a capacity issue or an area of specialty services or an area of geographic coverage. So in those situations, particularly if they have a contract or they're under the same ownership, it can be really hard to be like, use us instead of the agency that's part of your hospital or part of your health system. But you can say, hey, keep us in mind when your agency can't meet your needs, or keep us in mind for these particular services. Or I notice in evaluating your patients' geographic spread that you have some patients in this area that we service that the agency that's part of your health system doesn't. So we can take patients who reside there who come into your hospital if you need services for them. And perhaps there's an opportunity to increase referrals in that particular area. You know, if you dig into the data and understand maybe of the patients that live in that community, that in that county, in that area that's not serviced by the home health agency that's part of their health system, they're referring more of those patients home with no post-acute care, or maybe more of those patients to skilled nursing facility. And that could potentially be a conversation that you can approach and say, I noticed that you don't have as many patients receiving home health in this particular area. And maybe that's because your own home health agency doesn't serve there. So let's talk about how we can make sure that patients who live in that area that you don't service have the appropriate level of care, and let us take on those patients. And again, like I said, we can give some generic suggestions and advice, but we also find that we have more in-depth conversations about the specifics of your situation. We're like, oh, well, with that detail, understanding this dynamic or understanding this thing, then we might tweak that recommendation. So again, we welcome a follow-up conversation if you're interested.
Definitely. As our growth solutions team would say, you know, using that data can really help you identify what's in it for them. You know, that's, you know, what benefit can we provide?
I know I'm kind of channeling the growth solutions folks. I had never heard that first secondary provider of choice, but it makes total sense. You've got those tight relationships, you aren't going to displace them. So let's talk about what we can do out when a patient doesn't fit into that particular pattern. That's something I learned from growth solutions, and I think it makes a ton of sense. So
definitely. Did anybody else have any questions? If you do, you can throw them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll give just a minute for people to throw a question in. If not, like Christy said, you have her contact information. We are available at any point in time. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you more about how we could help you. I hope this was great information. Christy, you did a great job explaining how to use some of this data to really drive business. So thank you.
thanks, Lucy.
I don't think we have any other questions right now. So I really appreciate everybody's time and attention. And we'll see you at some of our next webinars coming up. I believe our next one is going to be on Oasis E. So feel free to check out our website.
That's a fun topic. Okay, market data is more fun. I get Oasis E has got a little bit of a time pressure on it. I have talked about Oasis E too, and there's some interesting things in there. If you haven't paid attention to Oasis E yet, make sure you sign up for that. But the market data, market analysis platform is more fun, if I'm being honest. So yeah, maybe learn about Oasis E and then come and play with data with me. So
definitely. Well, thank you, Christy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We really appreciate you guys being here with us today. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you, Missy.